Welcome to Controlled Chaos. My name is Shana and I'm here with my new friend Quinn. Can you tell us just a little bit about you?
Well, that's a freaking loaded
A
question.
loaded
Holy
one, right?
cow. Well, I experienced substance abuse for a very long time in my life, 18 years. I started when I was about 15 years old. I got prescribed Oxycontin after going through surgery. And due to the traumatic experiences that I had in my early childhood with molestation and bullying for being foreign and the abandonment that I experienced, feeling like my mom was like pushing me off onto my dad, even though I didn't know him at a certain point in my life, and then back and forth going, different schools every year and, not really having like any security whatsoever. When I
Right.
found those substances, it was just like it was home. It gave me that feeling of like, hey, everything's okay, and so I held on to that really tightly for a very long time. And I'd say for about 15 years, I didn't want to get sober. I was completely content ruining my life and escaping and numbing and all of the other things because I didn't want to be sober and experience all the things that, would come rushing back when I was sober.
So,
So,
can you tell us a little bit like about your childhood? Like, can you go into kind of what that all was that kind of got you on the track when you did start taking those pills?
yeah, absolutely. So, I moved to the States when I was 4 years old. When we got here, I didn't speak a word of English, got into school, and it was immediately ostracized. I didn't speak English, so I couldn't make friends. I didn't know how to like tell jokes or like even relate to
Mhm.
people. So I was ostracized, and that made me feel like, oh, well, people don't want to be my friends. And so I was very
Mhm.
shut in. And being a shut in and being that a lot that appears as a vulnerability to predators, to abusers. So at the age of 5, I started being sexually molested until about the age of 7. We moved from that location, and when I had expressed to my family, like that this was happening, there was a language barrier. I was 7 years old when it was the final straw of me
Mhm.
being, fed up with what was happening to me. It was a very minuscule instance where I went to the person's house because we were neighbors, and like we'd all play together, neighborhood kids and stuff. And he was only a few years older than me.
Mhm.
And I go over there and I walk up and he's talking to his girlfriend that he has, that he was making us all do
Mhm.
stuff in front of with him and to them and everything else. And he goes, hey, Quinn, show me your belly button. And I don't know what it was that day that made me feel uncomfortable, but something in me was just like, man, I'm so tired of this guy just using my body like whenever he wants and like controlling my body and telling, because he was like, show her your belly button, and so I was like, dude, this isn't your body to be showing people like at your free will, So I ran up to the front of the house and I knock on the door and I tell his mom, freaking Michael, he's asking me to show him my belly button and again, and I'm just so tired of this, and she's like, okay, like, then stop playing with him. And I was like, okay, whatever. I run home. I tell my mom, freaking, I'm tired of Mike. He's asking to see like my belly button and stuff, and I just don't, I'm not comfortable with it. And my mom was like, well, whatever. You guys are just kids, kind of. So it was brushed off. And being that I was this 7 year old that was highly impressionable, I was like, oh, okay, well, so this is just normal, like this is okay. And it
So,
wasn't
can we
until
talk about that for a second? Because I've had this conversation before with other people because of stuff that happened like in my childhood or with my family and stuff. And there's almost this thing where sometimes people think that it's not necessarily abuse if they're kids too, or like just
Mhm.
a few years older than you, or things like that. And I think what we kind of miss with that is that those children are probably something is happening to them, right, by somebody who's older. And that's where they're learning these different things because most kids at 7, right? Don't just randomly know all of that stuff or
Right.
things like that,
Absolutely.
right? So it's coming from somewhere and going down to these kids, right? So did you deal with that at all? I mean, on top of the fact that there was, because a lot of kids don't even go to their parents, right? But you
Mhm.
went there and it was kind of not really heard due to a
Right.
lot of things.
Right.
So is was there like all of that confusion going on?
At that time, I mean, life was so volatile, like we were
Mhm.
moving all the time, changing schools, bullying. Like as a little kid, I don't remember thinking too much of it in that time, being
Right.
7 years old and whatever. But when I got sober and I went on a plant medicine ceremony. I did 7 grams
Mhm.
of psilocybin and was able to talk with my younger self. And as I'm talking to my younger self, we're going through these traumatic events in my life, the abandonment, the
Mhm.
molestation, the bullying, all these things. And so we're like resolving them together, but it's really just me
Right.
resolving it with myself, right? And the conclusion that I came to in my mind, and this is,
Mhm.
whether it was a conclusion or the lie that I have to tell myself or, whatever it is that will make my brain say, okay, you know what, I can, like, not excusing what happened, but I can at least understand,
Right.
why or what a possibility is, and because I don't have the ability to address my abuser, this is what I
Mhm.
had to tell myself so that I can move forward and forgive that person. Because I
Right.
think that forgiveness is the most important. And so, yes, I
Mhm.
absolutely, that's the conclusion that I came to is kid was, 10 years old.
Mhm.
At 10 years old, you don't just go around doing that stuff
Right.
unless it's been like unless somebody is teaching you that, and
Yeah.
so in my head I was like, well, if he was able to do that and felt like that was an appropriate way to express that you like somebody or that you care about somebody or
Right.
that you are freaking interested in them like physically or whatever, he was learning those same
Mhm.
behaviors from somebody, and likely that person was older, whether it was parents or neighbors or uncles or whatever. So
Right.
that's the conclusion that I came to myself that allowed me to proceed and forgive and say, okay, you know
Mhm.
what? Like, it's not okay what you did. Like, you're
Right.
not being excused, but I'm forgiving you so that I can let go of that resentment,
Mhm.
because holding on to this resentment is what is controlling my life. And so
Yes.
by not forgiving you, you continue to hold that power. And by
Mhm.
forgiving you, I'm taking that power back.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a very impactful ceremony that changed my life completely.
Okay, so you're going through all this stuff, like obviously in school, getting bullied, all of that. And what kind of happens after that?
So I struggle making friends. I struggle making conversation or feeling like, voicing my opinions or whatever is just going to get silenced or overlooked. And so I was
Mhm.
very introverted. I started getting in fights. My mom sends me off to France to live with my dad that I barely knew for a year during my 8th grade. And that was where like the true abandonment came in, where I was like, holy cow, like the only stable parent that I've ever had is literally pawning me off to some stranger. I go to
Right.
France. I get
Mhm.
there and my dad's on deployment. He's in the French military. So he was on deployment. I'm staying with his wife, so my stepmom, who
Mhm.
has 3 kids under the age of 4, and now has to take care of some teenage boy from America from some other marriage. So you can
Mhm.
imagine how much she liked me,
Right.
like, and it was hell. It was absolute hell
Mhm.
for me. And when I got back to the States after a year, I asked my mom, hey, can I stay in the States? Like, France is, not working well for me. Can I please stay here? She tells me, well, you have to ask, the guy that she was dating at the
Mhm.
time. And so in my head, I'm like, so if he says no, then the answer is no. And so like
Mhm.
you're supposed to be my parent. So like I don't belong in France and I don't belong here either. Like where do I even belong? Like nobody
Right.
wants me, you know? So I started making friends with these skater kids, started freaking sneaking out at night and whatever else, and started smoking weed and doing ecstasy, and then came the cocaine, and then freaking, everything else kind of like all then that's when I started that's when I had the surgery. I hadn't tried painkillers up until this point yet. So they
So
give
you
me
were
the
still a
painkillers.
teenager.
Yeah, still a teenager, doing coke, doing ecstasy, smoking weed,
Mhm.
doing mushrooms, but like hadn't really gone down like the opiates
Right.
freaking avenue. Went to get surgery, boom, they prescribed me, and it was just like I fell in love instantly. And for the next 18 years, it's just this roller coaster of addiction, the same things that we all go through, the lies, the manipulation, the freaking homelessness, the abscesses and medical condition, like medical issues, and
Mhm.
losing family, losing friends, losing relationships, losing everything that I freaking owned, my car, my house, my motorcycles, I mean everything, my businesses. It's just same typical stuff that happens to everybody. And
So
then
for those who kind of don't know or live in this day and age, not to call us old, but it's like medicines like that are a lot less prescribed now, or they kind of take more care or prescribe a little bit less or things like that. But I've tried explaining this before to people. Like I was diagnosed with ADD when I was like 11 and I got Adderall and I just carried it in my pocket and took it when I was tired for years. Like it was no big deal. Nobody really knew that it was, not to say I didn't know it was not great to take a lot of it, but I didn't know anything about addiction. Either did my
right.
parents really. And
Yeah.
all those things were just kind of like thrown at you like, hey, here, have this. Hey, here, this will fix it. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, there was like a whole generation of people that were like on pills at
Yeah.
a really young age, because that's a really young age, like a teenager to be, you know what I mean, getting
Yeah.
addicted to that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they just to give a little perspective, doctors when I was
Mhm.
16, which wasn't that long ago, it was what, 2002? I was 16, 2002.
Mhm.
In 2002, you could still fake a prescription. If you had a computer and a printer, you could walk into a pharmacy with a thing that just says, a
Mhm.
doctor's name and a signature for whatever else, and you could hand it to them and they'd give it to you.
Right.
After the opioid epidemic, once they found out that the Purdue company, the Purdue family that created OxyContin, literally went out and did these freaking social experiments to find out how can we sell this the best, like morphine, people associate that with extreme
Mhm.
pain, freaking, and they like literally had like a study where they were asking people like which one of these names it seems like the least harmful. And they asked about OxyContin, and they were like, "Oh, well, oxy sounds like oxygen, and cotton, sounds like a freaking cloud. Like that's
Right.
to the brain, that's not, it doesn't give the same reaction that morphine does, or fentanyl, or freaking heroin,
Hmm.
So they literally tailored the drugs to
Right.
they designed the drugs to be attractive,
Yeah, to be
you
able to
know
make as much money as they could.
and then on top of that they were paying doctors and physicians huge bonuses to get these people prescribed. So instead of you going in and saying, oh, I freaking got
Mhm.
stitches and whatever else I need, instead of them giving you a script of Lortab 10s or something that was far more than sufficient, they're now giving you a freaking Oxycontin 30 or 80 or freaking whatever that is so high of a potency that after 3 4 days you're hooked, physically hooked. Even people who don't have like the receptors that respond to addiction, people still were getting hooked like crazy from the
Right.
physical addiction.
So
So
can you
yeah,
tell us kind of like when you got on those pills, what was the first like what did you feel? Like when was the first time you knew like, oh, like this is something I really like more than it's for pain, right?
I had taken the pill for like as prescribed. Just like you mentioned, I didn't like people will get on my social media and they're like, you know what you were doing. Everybody knows addiction. Everybody knows like that drugs are bad for you. And it's like not being stupid. I
Right.
didn't know.
Yeah,
I
I
I
really
had
didn't either.
never had even heard the term withdrawal. right? And
Mhm.
so I'm taking these pills as prescribed, and then I had smoked weed on top of it. And it
Mhm.
was just like the euphoria, just like filled my body. And I was just like, whoa, like what is this feeling? And then I started to chase it. I started to say, oh, well, I want to feel like that again. I want to feel like that again,
So you said
and
something that really like hit, and it was that it was earlier that it just felt like home. And I think that's something that people really miss when they try to understand addiction, alcoholism, all of that is like you're chasing this feeling where all of a sudden everything feels so good and perfect. Like you're like,
yep,
okay, this is how I'm supposed to feel, right? And
absolutely.
then after a while, it'll let you do that for a minute, but after a while, you're just continuing to chase that because it doesn't give you that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's
So,
like this, I don't know, like, oh, this is perfect. And then you can't find it again.
mhm. I have a great theory for that. And my
Hmm.
theory is that for people in my situation where my childhood was very volatile, there
Hmm.
wasn't a whole lot of dopamine spikes, right? Everybody has dopamine. Literally every single person's brain is motivated by dopamine. That's literally the only thing that your brain is searching for every second of the day. Why do I want a better job? So that I can get that dopamine release that makes me feel like I'm being fulfilled. Why do I want a family? So that I get that dopamine release when I,
Yes.
express that I love. Why do I want to, work out? So that I get that dopamine, so that I can be, so that I can feel good about myself. Like all these things that
Hmm.
we say so that I can feel good, what you're saying is so that I can get the dopamine release.
Right.
So when we understand that our life and our brain's single motivator is dopamine, then we start to understand, okay, well, why was I so attracted by this overflow in
Hmm.
dopamine? And I think this is my theory that for people who have experienced, traumatic childhoods, oh, hi, James, not on the
Oh,
computer, please. Of course, you would freaking press buttons. My theory is that for people who have lived this life of traumatic events, or there's no dopamine spikes, or they're few and far between. Like, yeah,
mhm.
you might freaking, your parent might have shown up to your freaking assembly one time, your whatever, and you're like, oh, they actually showed up, but they're few and far between.
And
And so
also, sorry, but I want to make sure we point this out because you talked about this earlier. Also, people with ADD and ADHD are known to have very low dopamine in the first place.
absolutely, they don't know
So,
what.
like dealing with all those things, there's so many contributors.
Yes, I th- I personally don't think that people are born with ADHD.
Mhm.
I think that ADHD, and there's no proven scientific like explanation for why people
Mhm.
develop ADHD, but the research shows that like most research will tell you that the reason ADHD develops in people is because of a deficiency in dopamine. That's, so the brain is trying to compensate, but when you're living in traumatic events and you're already, you're living on this life where your habitual dopamine levels are super low already because you're either stuck in fight or flight, or you're insecure, or you're introverted, or you're, abused and whatever else. You're living on this low
Mhm.
habitual dopamine level, and then something traumatic happens again, boom, now you're feeling
Right.
even less and less. And so the brain, because it's like, oh man, I'm already on this low dopamine and now I'm getting sexually abused, like the brain's like, well, survival mechanism, we've got to compensate heavy for this. And so we compensate by developing mental health conditions. So
Yeah.
what I was saying about the dopamine spikes, what I feel that attraction is that throughout our childhood we have this low habitual dopamine level with these short, spikes in between. And then when I found Oxycontin, what Oxycontin does and what cocaine does and heroin and methamphetamine, they release large amounts of dopamine into the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your decision making, right?
Right.
So you get addicted to something that is literally tricking your mind into thinking like, because it's the same dopamine that gets released when I fall in love. that it is when I take a hit of a drug or a drink or whatever it is, right? So the
Mhm.
dopamine doesn't know the difference of drug induced dopamine or love induced dopamine. All it knows is that I'm getting that feel good
Thank
chemical
God,
that will
finally,
always.
somebody's giving me some good stuff, right?
Exactly. So my theory is that once we experience this large rush of dopamine without, experiencing what dopamine is throughout your life, and then you get to, teenage years and you get this flood of dopamine that says, "Man, I freaking love you." It gives you that warm feeling. Like I said, it's literally the same dopamine that happens when you fall in love. So if you can just imagine for 1 second how you felt the last time you fell in love,
Yeah.
right? You feel like everything's okay. Like I have found the one. I'm like I don't care if I have to live in a cardboard box if it means that I get to be with you. That's how deep our love is. And it's the same chemical that's released. And if you think about it, it's the same stuff that we do for our addictions. I'll freaking give everything that I have to be with you. I'll live in a cardboard box, literally live in a cardboard box to be with you. And so the brain is like, I just like this feeling. It doesn't understand where it's coming from, right? It's us, it's our consciousness that is able to decide, what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. But the brain doesn't, it can't understand those things. It's just a processor, right? It's just a machine. Like our consciousness is the one actually doing the things, right? Or
Right.
making decisions. So once you're in that state, and you like, oh, I feel like I'm getting all the love that I've ever been missing,
It's really like a
and
feeling of secure. Like all of a sudden
yeah,
you're secure and you feel just okay with life.
yeah,
And I think that that's something that I don't know if I'll ever be able to really explain to other people is like there was a time where I felt like I was almost like walking in a dream all the time and super anxious and nervous and tired. And then I got diagnosed with ADD and I took this medication and I promised within like 2 days, I was like, oh, so this is what people feel like in real life. Like this is, I thought God himself came down and gave me that, you know?
yeah,
Like there was there was not really a thought about addiction. I was like, oh, this is what you're supposed to feel like.
right.
So, first of all, I could talk to you forever. You have so much like knowledge. This is crazy. But so, when did you kind of start noticing? Because I know you've kind of said that you obviously you hit lots of rock bottoms, right? But when did you kind of start noticing like, maybe this is like not a good thing? Like maybe this is
What,
not
substance
good for
abuse?
me. Yeah,
So
like you, the pills, like how your life was going. When did you start thinking, like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this?
I knew that I was doing something wrong the minute that I was getting substances that weren't prescribed.
Okay.
Maybe probably even before I got prescribed Oxycontin, even just smoking weed, I knew I was doing something wrong. Like, not one, I don't condone, people using substances like in early, teenage years and things like that. It's just not good for the brain. But I knew that I was doing something wrong because my mom was like, I don't want you doing that. You know,
Right.
the thing is that I didn't care because it was like you're trying to be my mom, but you're not my mom. Like, because you were ready to freaking throw me at the door if your boyfriend said no. So obviously your boyfriend is more important than me. And if your boyfriend's more important than me, then I don't want anything to do with you. And so I knew I didn't care.
Mhm.
That was the thing.
Okay, so you're like going along, you're taking these drugs. You said you had like businesses.
Hmm.
So you were able to function like on some level, right? Like you were functioning for a
Yeah.
while. Like what
Yes.
did life look like?
So I did heroin 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. It was also the year I graduated that same time.
So you were
So
like going to college and then that was the first time you decided to
I
do heroin.
I had no plans to go to college right out of high school. I
Hmm.
was I was going to take a year off and figure out some things. That's what my excuse was, to not have to, because I was selling drugs by this time. So I was like, well, I'm making more money if I go to college, like what's the waste? Like I literally was so deluded that I was like, I'm gonna be the next freaking El Chapo. I'm gonna be living on some island one day, freaking with all my drug money and all the drugs that I want. Because that I had literally came to accept that like I was gonna live that life. That I was gonna
Okay.
be on drugs, like nobody was gonna stop me, and that was just it. But get out of high school, and I actually did really great in high school. Got like the second highest ACT score or something, or in the math portion of it. Like I was really smart.
I could see
Um,
that just by the amount of information you have. I don't doubt that.
so I freaking thank you. I appreciate that. I'm flattered. So I took the year off, and as I'm selling drugs and doing everything else, I started a little landscaping company. So I started doing some landscaping or whatever. That was going well. I started doing painting and all these things. So I had this little like handyman service. And then I started to get really bad on cocaine,
Okay.
and I can't remember exactly what it was. Something happened, something traumatic. Either I got busted, I got arrested, I got robbed, I got home invaded, freaking, my parents find out, whatever. Something happened where I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I need to, maybe I need to get some help, because even though I didn't want to stop using drugs, I could tell that the way that I was using them was very detrimental. And
So you
like,
wanted to do it better.
yeah, yeah. I wanted to do it better so that I could do it longer, right?
Why is that every addict alcoholic's dream? Like, okay, I don't want to stop. I just don't want to do it like I'm doing it.
Right.
Like we think that it's in our control.
Because I think the reason for that is because we're not ready to fully let go of the things that the small amount of things that we have found relief in. I was just talking about this the other day. When people were asking me to get sober, what I was hearing was let go of the one thing that has given you any relief from your trauma, from your freaking misery, and from all the things. And I
I,
wasn't
I
ready to let
actually
that
was
go.
I actually was telling somebody that the other day that I had no idea that like how I felt at like 2 months sober would not be how I felt like 3 years sober. For the longest time, I would make it to 2 months and I would want to like, not even kidding, would want to like jump off a bridge. Like I was so depressed, I was so anxious. And I finally, I would always be like, I don't want to live like a alcoholic anymore, but I also don't want to live sober. Like I feel like shit then too.
Right.
And I didn't realize that like you abused your body for so long, like it will take time for it to
Yes.
come back. So when people say to you, get sober, I don't think people realize a lot of times what you're thinking sober is it was not a good thing any of the times you've been sober in the last
Yeah.
10 years that you can remember. Like it's
Right.
not like you remember when you were 5, and if you
Right.
did, what do you remember?
Hmm.
The bad things, right? So when you're asking me to go back to that, at least every once in a while, I feel good this way.
Yeah. And did you know that that's actually not a normal reaction? For us, it's like, what do you think about when you were a little kid? Bad things, right? That's the things you remember. That's not everybody. And when I heard that, that blew my mind. Like I've got some memories from when I was a kid, but I hear that a lot.
Mhm.
That all my memories were bad. And it makes a lot of sense. The things that stick out in our head are the things that release a lot of chemicals at the same time, whether it's
Yeah.
oxytocin or freaking serotonin or dopamine or whatever. The brain builds neurological passages to remember those things. And when we are taking substances that release these huge amount of freaking, we're able to either like have that as a core memory or completely disassociate from it, depending on,
Right.
what you want to do. But talking to my freaking brother-in-law, he
Hmm.
doesn't have those. He doesn't have bad experiences from when he was a kid. And I freaking love that. I love that for him.
Right.
But to me, that was something that I didn't understand. It's like, wait, what? You had a good childhood? Those exist? What?
That's crazy. Okay, so you said something happened. You were telling me something. Do you remember? Did I bring you off track?
No, I don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you're at this place where you were about to do heroin, right?
Hmm.
You just graduated high school. So what made you do heroin for the first time? Because that's something that like a lot of people are scared of, right? Like you think like needles or I don't know, whatever. And like what made you be like, yeah, I want to try it?
So I think for me, it was the idea that when I was going through the DARE program, my brother struggled with meth addiction. And even though I knew it, I didn't understand. Like like in my brain, my 15-year-old brain, I was like, oh, my brother's a freaking, he's a meth head. And like I've been through DARE. We've all, gone through the drug programs in school and stuff. And in the DARE programs, they tell you, hey, if you do this one time, you're gonna lose your life. You're gonna freaking, end up on the
Mhm.
streets and sell all your parents' stuff. And I guess just the way my brain interpreted it, for whatever reason, I thought that that was like an immediate thing,
Mhm.
And so growing up, my stepfather was a cokehead alcoholic, very abusive domestically and verbally to my mom and to us. And I saw that he's a cokehead, right? And he's an alcoholic, but he's holding down a freaking construction job that back in like, 1990,
Mhm.
whatever, was getting like $25 an hour. So it's probably like 50 an hour now.
Mhm.
He's got
Right?
a house. He's got a big old nice truck. He's the
Right.
foreman on the freaking. So in my brain, I was like, well,
You were like, BS,
maybe,
they lie.
yeah, maybe so, maybe they exaggerated it to freaking
Mhm.
scare us away, right?
Yeah.
And so then when I got prescribed the pills, and they're opiates, I'm like, okay, so this is an opiate, this comes from the poppy plant. And then I'm looking at, I'm researching the poppy plant and figure out, oh, well, poppy also produces the morphine, and the morphine is what is transformed into fentanyl and, like codeine and all that other stuff. So I was like, okay, so they all come from the same plant, right? They all kind of do the
Mhm.
same thing. And because at that time here in Salt Lake City, I don't know, we got this huge flood of random opium. There was red opium, there was black opium, there was freaking white opium, and I understood that these all came from the poppy plant. And so we're smoking the opium, and to be honest, I didn't really ever feel anything from it. So I just was
Mhm.
like, whatever, I've got money, I sell drugs. Everybody wants this opium stuff to put on top of their weed. So whatever, I'll carry it, I'll sell it, whatever, I'll try it, just to see what I'm selling, whatever else. And so I was like,
Mhm.
sure, whatever, no big deal. Then my buddy's like, oh, well, yeah, I've got heroin. And I was like, well, what is that like? And he's like, well, it's just like opium. It comes from the same plant, And so it kind of like got like the severity of it got diminished
Right.
while also not being highlighted in the effects,
Mhm.
in the byproduct of what would happen if I used those. So the first time I did heroin, it was freaking amazing. And I liked the feeling. It was instant. It was the same feeling that I'd got from smoking weed and doing pills, and it was way cheaper. And I
Mhm.
was like, cool, that was awesome. Didn't do it again for, another week or two or whatever. And then got some more from a buddy. It was great. Then, a couple of weeks ago, then I started getting it. Okay, well then this weekend I'm gonna get it. Oh, okay, well then Wednesday. Oh, okay, well then tomorrow. Oh, okay. And then I started making plans to get it. And then next thing you know, I'm getting it every day. And then one day I freaking, decide for whatever reason that I'm not going to take it, or that I'm going to freaking, or I didn't take it before I freaking left the house or whatever. And then I get 8 to 10 hours into my last dosage, and I'm like, oh, like what is happening right now? Like what is going on with my body? I'm yawning, I'm sore, I'm sneezing, my freaking eyes are
Mhm.
watering, and I've got I'm sick to my stomach, I'm puking, all these things. Like what the heck is going on? And I call
Right.
my buddy and I'm like, yo, dude, like, or he calls me or whatever. And he's like, what's up? I'm, dude, I don't know what's going on, man. I'm feeling like shit. And I'm like, we start talking about it. And he's like, bro, like it's the heroin. Like if you didn't take it and you've been taking it, like you're going through withdrawal. And I was like, what is a withdrawal? He's like, oh yeah, well, this is what happens in your body. You're freaking when you're taking opiates, all your muscles relax. And so when you stop using those opiates, all your muscles and everything constrict. And that's why it just feels like everything is tight and you just want to squeeze everything. That's what's happening to you. And I was just like, oh man, I didn't even know. Like,
Right.
and so I got off of it. I did a Suboxone taper, got off of it, and then a couple months later, because I'm still selling everything, boom, right back in. I was like, oh, okay, well that wasn't so bad. I know what I got to do now if I feel like that.
Mhm.
Either just not ever stop taking it, or I can take Suboxone if I need to, and then stay on a Suboxone taper for 7 days, and I'll be fine.
Right.
And that worked for a while. I would go on these roller coasters. I'd get a moment of clarity and be like, I don't like the way that I'm doing this right now. I don't like what it's bringing out in me. And so I'd get sober for a few months, and then just roller coaster.
So what eventually made you kind of want to get sober?
I think that although I liked being high all the time and wanting to escape and doing all these things, I started to recognize that I was doing these things because of my past trauma, or because I didn't want to deal with
Mhm.
people or situations or relationships or whatever. And I started to dislike that about me. The isolation, the freaking, all these things that all these insecurities that I had, all these things, just like I would have these moments of clarity where I'm like, I just don't like myself. And
Right.
that's the whole reason why I was freaking escaping through substances in the beginning, was because I didn't like myself. I wanted to, escape and be somebody else for a little bit. And I mean, it comes with not having, money to support your habit. It comes with, losing everything and not being
Mhm.
able to form relationships or strong connections or anything like that. And I started to recognize that like everything that I was missing, it was because I was using substances to fill that hole. So if I
Mhm.
didn't have friendships, I would fill it with drugs. If I didn't have a sense of community or hobbies, or, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No.
It's basically it's a theory from, his name was Abraham Maslow, and
Okay.
he was a philosopher that said that like to feel fulfilled in life, you have to have these five things. It's not questionable. You have to have them.
Right.
The first most important one being food, water, right? You have to have
Right.
food, water, and air to be able to live. Like that's basic, right?
Yeah.
And I don't really remember the exact order of the steps, but the next ones would be self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, self-fulfillment, what we're doing to feel fulfilled, whether it's hobbies or freaking work or whatever else, a sense of community, people to talk to, somewhere you freaking, feel safe opening up, a home, a sense of security, like somewhere that you can call home, somewhere that is your like
Mhm.
your retreat, your freaking where you go lay your head at night and you can feel safe from the outside
Mhm.
elements.
Right.
And so these things are necessary, and I started to notice that like when I didn't have a place to live, it was because of drugs. If I didn't
Right.
have friends, it was because of drugs. If I didn't have hobbies, if I didn't have family, if I didn't have connection, if I didn't have all these things,
Mhm.
self-fulfillment, it was because of drugs. And so I was like, I don't like this. I don't like who I am. And my final rock bottom was, me sitting on the edge of a bed in Atlanta, Georgia, freaking sick, just dying sick because of withdrawal. And I'm sitting here poking myself. I've been at this point, I was substance abuse for 18 years. So my veins were shot. I had no veins left. They were all
Right.
collapsed, freaking everything else having to shoot up in my fingers or my freaking, like my palms of my hands or my neck or
Mhm.
freaking face, whatever. Wherever I could find them, I was shooting up.
I had
And
somebody on here that was telling me a story, and he said he shot in his downstairs, and I didn't know that was a thing. I was like in the
yeah,
middle of the podcast, I was like, I'm
yeah.
sorry, what?
Yeah, no, yeah, it absolutely does. And
So you
because
can do it
because it's
anywhere,
like a
basically.
yeah, you can do it in any vein. Any
Yeah.
vein. I have done that because of whatever is in the heroin or whatever. And because the veins in your penis are going towards the outside of like the foreskin and things,
Hmm.
the opiates will release into your skin, unlike most places. And so when
Oh,
I did it, because I've done that before too, my whole freaking junk turned black. Like, and I thought it was gonna fall off, and it scared the shit out of me. So
I bet.
I didn't like doing that.
No.
But it doesn't mean I didn't do it again because I had no other veins and it was easy to
Right.
find, you know. So and that's, you know, that's what the substances do to the brain.
Yeah.
They flood your prefrontal cortex to where you're not able to make rational decisions, you
Hmm.
know. But so anyway, so I'm sitting on my bed trying to find a vein. My veins are all shot. I'm digging for 45 minutes. Finally find one. The blood registers in the needle. I go to push back in and it starts stinging, which means that I'm no longer in the vein. And you have to be in the vein to be able to get those effects. So I'm like, okay, great. Now I have to try again. So I pull the needle back out and I'm digging again, searching for veins and stuff. And freaking about 10 minutes goes by. I find one, go to push it in, and it clogs the plunger because the blood had coagulated in the needle. So basically, the
Hmm.
needle's screwed, right? So now I don't even have a needle to inject it. So I'm just like, because I've been sick out of my mind and I'm sitting here freaking poking myself, feeling like a pincushion. There's blood everywhere.
Hmm.
It's just, it's a disgusting, disgusting place to be in. I just broke down. Like something in my brain
Yeah.
just freaking broke. And I got down on my knees and I'm bawling my eyes out. And I'm like, God, you got to take my life or give me strength. I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
Please, God. Like, I cannot do this. And I picked up the needle of heroin. The freaking needle was all bent and stuff. And I just squirted the stuff in my mouth, hoping it would give me like a painkiller effect, you know, like if I was
Hmm.
just ingesting a pill or whatever. And I just cuddled up next to my dog and I just freaking cried myself to sleep until whatever the heroin kicked in and was, you know, allowed me to at least get some relief. And then I woke up the next morning and I freaking first thing I do is I get on my phone and I tell my mom, Mom, I need help. And she calls me immediately. She's like, "What's going on?" And I was like, I can't do this anymore." And
Hmm.
I mean, a month prior to that, I'm talking to my mom. She knew that I was in substance abuse, and I told her like, I don't want to get sober. Like straight
Right.
up, I don't want to. You know, I'm gonna be a drug addict for the rest of my life. So either accept it or I'm just not gonna talk to you anymore.
Hmm.
And because she was trying to compensate for all the stuff, you know, in my childhood, she stuck by my side, you know, and
Right.
because she loves me, obviously, but she had come to accept that I was just going to be a drug addict for the rest of my life, however long that would be, whether it would be until my OD or until, you know, until she died or whatever. She just had come to accept that.
Hmm.
And so when I called her and I was like, I need this. I need help. I'm ready for help. She's like, okay, let's get you help. So I went to sober living, did abstinence for 9 months, got to step 12, doing, you know, daily inventory, sponsoring, meditation, amends, freaking, you know, surrender, hope, faith, all the things. Get to step 12, and it says, as a result of working these steps, we have a spiritual awakening. We continue to carry the message to those who still suffer. So I said,
Hmm.
where's my spiritual awakening? Because I'm here, I'm at sober living, I'm going to 5 meetings, I'm going to 5 AA meetings a week. I'm doing everything by the book. I'm like I've done everything
Hmm.
you guys told me. I do the sponsorships. I freaking, you know, I'm working this stuff. Like there's nothing else that I can possibly do,
Hmm.
but I'm sitting in here every single day wishing that I could get high. Like what was Bill Wilson talking about when he said this spiritual awakening would happen?
Right.
So I started to look into that. And I found that Bill Wilson had done a psychedelic treatment in New York, 1934, which was a year before they started to do before they started founding Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hmm.
As I'm reading through this letter, he talks about how they employed this concoction of belladonna and henbane that are freaking known to cause hallucinations. And then Bill Wilson was good friends with the great philosopher Carl Jung, right? This is the letter that he wrote to Carl Jung explaining his spiritual awakening that he got through this process. And he even, like, word for word says, you know, I've had a white light spiritual awakening from doing this
Hmm.
Towns Lambert cure. So
Okay.
so I'm like, okay, well that's weird because freaking AA definitely says no mood or mind altering substances. Let me look more into this. So I start digging more into it, and in 1973 or something, I mean, he'd written letters to Carl Jung, you know, throughout the, like they were good friends, so they would send
Hmm.
letters back and forth to each other for freaking 50 years. So I'm looking more into these Carl Jung letters and stuff, and I see in one of his letters he says, I'm Carl Jung asked about how AA is going, how the program's going, everything else, and he's like, well, I'm finding that people are struggling to find the spiritual awakening. People are
Mhm.
struggling with the spiritual awakening, so I've decided to start doing research into LSD. So I'm like, wait a minute, it says no mood or mind altering substance. Like, what is
Mhm.
going on here? And it freaking blew my mind because this whole time I'm freaking, white knuckling it in AA, freaking thinking that
It's
I have to be
crazy that you say
100%
that.
abstinent.
It's crazy that you say that because I do love AA as a program. I did it for years. I worked in drug treatment for a long time, even during my addiction. And I always was like, what in the hell is wrong with me that like I literally could like repeat the big book front to back. I do all the stuff that, and I can't stop. Like, since I was like 12 years old, never made it more than 2 months without using or drinking, right? So I'm like, why can I not do this? And I really thought, and I really was kind of taught because I was in AA that like if you don't get it, if you don't figure it out, it's because you don't want it. Well, I had
It's
been to
your fault.
treatment like
It's your fault.
20 times.
You're not working it hard enough. You
Yeah,
didn't
I'm like,
want
dude,
it
I went to treatment for
enough.
like
It's
20
crazy.
times. I went to sober living. Like, I did all the things and I could not, I would get home and I would be sober for a week. I shit you not. I went to treatment for 6 months once, like a Baptist treatment where I had to wear skirts down to my ankles and not cuss and all this stuff. And I came home and drank in a week. And I was like, listen, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I'm just gonna die this way. And it ended up that I ended up using medication to get sober in the end. I used the Vivitrol shot.
Hmm.
But without that, I mean, I spent like 20 years just relapsing, relapsing, relapsing. And I still like I love the 12 steps. They made me a much better person, but I'm like I wish we would quit telling people that like if this one thing doesn't work for them, that they just suck.
Yep. Yeah.
Because
No,
like
I
where
agree.
did they do that at? I was just dying of liver failure and thought like, well, AA didn't work.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
why? Why do we do that to people? Okay, go
I
ahead.
agree.
So you do the
Yep.
LSD thing, right?
Yeah. So yeah, so I just, so I found out that like for real, Bill Wilson was not abstinent. Like that's
Mhm.
just being 100% honest. And the reality was that he didn't believe in abstinence.
Mhm.
He didn't form the program in abstinence. You know, there's also this misconception that what people don't understand is that in 1935 when they started to build the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, they started doing all the studies and everything. 1935 drugs were not illegal.
Right.
You could go to the grocery store and ask the
Mhm.
pharmacist for a bottle of morphine and he would just give it to you, right?
Right.
Like I was saying, up until 2002, you could freaking fake a prescription. So it
Right.
wasn't that but in 1935, drugs weren't even illegal.
Right.
They didn't become illegal until 1936 or 37 or something like that. But the freaking
Mhm.
program of Alcoholics Anonymous is for alcoholics,
Right.
only for alcoholics. And the proof of that is this term sobriety. And if you look up the definition
Mhm.
of sobriety, it is plain and simple sober from alcohol.
Right.
So, so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, this program wasn't even made for drug addicts. Like, yeah, it works great for alcoholics. And sure, like, I understand the idea that like addiction is an addiction, but this idea of no mood or mind altering substances, it just doesn't make any sense because everything, everything that we consume
Caffeine.
is mood or mind altering. Because if you drink too much water, you will drown. Tell me your mood or mind isn't going to be altered by drowning. If
I
you
can't get
hyper
out of bed without Mountain Dew, so I'm telling you.
if you hyperventilate, if you just breathe oxygen enough, like
Mhm.
heavy, it'll be mood or mind altering. The day after pill is mood or mind altering. Birth control is mood or mind
Well, my
altering. Mental health
antidepressants,
medications.
let's get real. We
Yeah,
don't want me without those.
right. And then on top of that, the one that nobody wants to acknowledge, caffeine and nicotine. Like those are mood or mind
Mhm.
altering. And what we've done in the rooms of alcoholics today is we've altered the program. We've
I
altered
was
the
gonna
program
ask
to
you this.
say that alcohol or that caffeine and nicotine is okay. But the truth is that is not abstinence by the definition given to us by the books of Alcoholics Anonymous and Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. So if you're going to freaking divert from that, then who are we to freaking judge people who are on mental health medications or on cannabis? And they'll tell you, oh, well, that's an outside issue. Well, then
So
why are we judging people for these things?
I have a friend, and don't get me wrong, he is kind of a dog, so I know why he was going with this rule. But he told me one day, and again, I'm not super like book smart. My all of my talents are with social skills, right? So I halfway listened. But he told me one day when we were talking how that the big book or AA is not what came up with that rule. Like you can't date or you can't do this or
Mm-hmm.
that when you're in
Yeah.
like your first year. That actually the big book and AA was kind of like changed when rehab centers started because of insurance and like money stuff. And I mean, he had a whole spiel, right, of why he could date. And cool, I was like, what? But it actually made sense because, like, you don't really see those specific things written in there, or,
Mm-hmm.
and it is kind of a rule. And I get, like, okay, old men hitting on young women and they're vulnerable, stuff like that, right? But
Right.
I'm talking about like dating, like you meet somebody in AA and you
Mm-hmm.
like them
Mm-hmm.
type of thing, like that you shouldn't do that for the first year or
Yeah.
whatever. That those kind of rules were made up because of like rehab and because
Yeah.
people would run away
Yep.
or do whatever. And
Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a lot of there the book of Alcoholics Anonymous is actually only the first like 69 pages
Mm-hmm.
and the book's this freaking big, so you're like, what is the rest? Like 69 pages is
Yeah.
like this, right? So what the heck is this? And those are the doctor's opinions and freaking testimonies and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And but since 1936, things like sponsors, nowhere in the big book does it say anything about a sponsor. Not once is the word sponsor even in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It
Right.
talks about a mentor. And yeah, things like 13th step and freaking guys sponsoring girls or girls sponsoring guys. That's
Mm-hmm.
a rule that, has been placed on by the rooms of AA, not the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because the first 100 people, I don't even think, I think, can't even remember if there was even any women in the first trial,
Right. There
you
wasn't.
know?
There wasn't. That's
So
why I was like, oh, okay.
yeah. So these are things, and I agree with it. I agree
Mhm.
that freaking you need to have a mentor of some sort. I agree that freaking nobody with a position of authority like that should be able to freaking have, like a sexual desire for somebody else that they're mentoring, because that could,
Yeah, and
turn
there's some
ugly.
like I think there's common sense and
Yeah.
then there's always like outside of the box things that happen, right? Like that are okay. So I think that the black and white thing, it really doesn't work anywhere, right? But there are things that are common sense, right? Like you shouldn't be sponsoring someone you think is hot, right? Like that's not
Right.
going to work.
Right. Right. Exactly. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I love the program of Alcoholics
I do
Anonymous.
too.
I don't love the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. These days, here in Utah, I have an amazing community. I'm friends
Yeah.
with I'm friends with the directors of like four different rehabs. We're invited to their meetings as Men's Tribal House. They know, like, it says it in our name. Men's Tribal House, med card friendly sober living. So they all know that we're cannabis patients. But we go
Right.
to these things and we're welcome there. We're
Yeah,
starting
I
to
have a
see a
great
shift.
AA group here in my
Yeah.
town, and I hated the one where I used to live. So I think it just depends where you are and like
Yeah.
who you're surrounded with.
Yeah.
But I think it can be super dangerous to just tell people that, you do this way, and if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
you just don't care or you don't want it or whatever. I think that
Absolutely.
just keep trying, right? So I want to know about the good parts of your life because we're winding down and like I made you tell me all this educational stuff, which I'm like
Yeah.
semi glad that I learned half of this. Kind of cool.
Real quick, if I could,
Yes.
I just wanted to touch on one last thing
Hmm.
before we move forward, and that is that I agree. I agree with you that it's not fair for these people to say, hey, this is what you should or shouldn't do. Because the
Mhm.
reality is, after being, I continue to freaking carry the message to those who still suffer to this day,
Me
right? I
too.
work at a mental health facility. I take them to AA meetings, and CA and freaking everything else. I'm
Mhm.
also starting Cali Sober meetings, so that'll be an option soon. I
Mhm.
also take the guys from the sober living to CA, AA, and whatever else. And what I see is that the problem with these programs that freaking claim to be abstinent, I've sponsored so many people now, and I would say at least half, if not more, of my sponsees are on some kind of medication that is
Yeah.
prescribed by their doctor.
Mhm.
But they get up in front of the room and they tell the whole room, I've been sober since blah blah blah.
Yes.
Well, you're lying. That is a lie. For you to be prescribed a medication and walk up to the front of the room and say that you're sober under the understanding that sobriety means complete abstinence from all mood or mind altering substances, you're lying to the room. And to the person who's got 4 years, 5 years of recovery, I don't care. But to the
Right.
newcomer that's coming in here who's dealing with freaking, you know, depression and anxiety and withdrawal and freaking mental health
Mhm.
conditions and all of this stuff, and we get up there and say this, the freaking 50 people in this room are raw dogging life right now, 100% abstinent. So that
Mhm.
means you got to do it too. But half of them aren't. Half of them are freaking are one, like, without a doubt on some kind of prescription.
Mhm.
That doesn't include the people who are freaking abusing other things like pornography or caffeine or nicotine or whatever else. I don't claim to be clean. I know I have to work on my
Mhm.
relationship with nicotine. I know that. I recognize that.
Yeah.
But I don't get up in front of a room and tell people a lie, because telling somebody in the rooms of AA that you're sober is actually telling them I am abstinent. And if you're claiming abstinence, but altering the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to fit your narrative, that what sobriety looks like to you, which
Mhm.
may just be 100% abstinence from everything except for caffeine and nicotine, like that, you're telling these people that they have to do it because you're doing it, and we're supposed to set
Mhm.
the example. So my whole my whole idea of starting these Cali Sober meetings and stuff
Mhm.
is not about Cali Sober is about harm reduction. It's about
Mhm.
medical assisted treatment. It's about finding what is going to work for you, whatever that looks like, and being 100% honest and transparent with yourself to be able to make the decision, is this hurting me or is this healing me? Right?
Right.
That's to me, that's
Mhm.
the only thing that's important. I don't care if you got to take Xanax, to be able to freaking get,
Mhm.
manage your depression. I don't care if you have to take Adderall because you have ADHD. What I care about is, how are you like, what is the intention? Are you doing
Right.
it because you are wanting to live a better life and you're trying all these different things hoping that something is going to stick until you find something that works for you, that makes sense to you, that you can proceed in life and live a manageable life? Because that's the whole process of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That's the whole idea. We came to
Mhm.
believe our lives
Right.
became unmanageable. So I want you to do whatever it takes to make your life manageable, because I'm tired of
Mhm.
seeing people freaking die in the streets and freaking OD and all this. We're losing people at such an insane rate that I'm like, you know what? I don't care.
Yes.
I don't care what you do, as long
Mhm.
as you freaking get a control of the obsession. That's the
Right.
most important thing. So
100%. I might have to change my word though. I've always used sober. I might have to change that word because I guess I never looked into it that deeply. That's crazy. I mean, that's real though.
I personally think that sobriety is a mind state, and being
Mhm.
clean or being positive or negative on a drug screen is a physical state, right?
Mhm.
So for somebody, let's just take it to the extreme for a second. For somebody that has bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, these types of severe mental health conditions, somebody that is not properly medicated. Let's take Kanye West, for example, right? You remember just a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, there was this huge thing on the internet, everybody saying, oh, he's off his meds. He's crazy, right?
Hmm.
Because he's got mental health and he's off his meds, so he must be crazy. But we take that same so not taking your medications when you have mental health conditions will label you crazy.
Yeah.
But you go into the rooms of AA and you say, I'm taking a medication. Now you're not sober. So you have a choice to make: be 100% abstinent and be labeled crazy, but you get the freaking title of also being sober. So what do you want to be? Do you want to be sober, or do you want to be freaking, labeled as crazy? And that's the choices that we're given. Either go
Right.
manic and freaking raw dog your mental health, or
Right.
or get a prescription and freaking deal with it. That to me is more important.
Mhm.
Sobriety is
100%.
where your mind is at. Like, are you having healthy thoughts? Are you having healthy behaviors? Are you having healthy
Mhm.
coping mechanisms? Are you working your job and doing, like, are you being a good, responsible person? Are you paying your bills? Are you freaking, you know, doing things to advance like your knowledge and your strength, or your charisma or your character, or whatever it is? Like, where are you at in your life? And is what you're doing taking you further away from happiness or bringing you closer to happiness? And
Right.
we know the answers. Today
Hmm.
my life is freaking amazing. It's beautiful. I love waking up and working on all the freaking things that I'm working on right now. Does cannabis take away from that, or does it add to that? If I were to take cannabis away from my routine, which helps me with my depression and my anxiety and freaking my mental health and stuff like that, so that I don't have to take those pharmaceuticals, because that's what
Hmm.
works for me. Not saying that it works for everybody, but I
Right.
found a safe alternative with plant medicines as the alternative to pharmaceuticals. So
Mhm.
that is what works for me. If I
Right.
go out tomorrow and I break my leg, I get in a car accident, I break my freaking femur, I'm not going
Hmm.
to go into the doctor and say, don't give me morphine. I'm a freaking recovering heroin addict. That would be stupid, right?
Right.
For me to be
Mhm.
in this intense amount of pain would be stupid for me to allow myself to
Mhm.
be in that, because there's a solution. The solution is that you take the prescription. Understanding that I have a predisposition
Right.
to getting addicted, I'll be aware that, like, hey, I don't want to do this more than, just today. I need to take a break, or else I'll freaking get physically addictive or whatever. But I recognize those things. But I'm not
Hmm.
going to turn it down, because breaking your femur and going to the doctor and having morphine is an appropriate time and place.
Right.
Now, for me to go to a freaking party and go and sit in the bathroom and freaking, do a shot of heroin or freaking take a morphine pill or whatever, same morphine pill that I got from this is no longer acceptable. It's not,
Right.
I'm not healing from this, right? Taking the medication at the hospital will allow me to heal. Taking the medication in a freaking bathroom at a party is hurting me.
Hmm.
It's not going to add
Right.
to my experience.
Yeah.
And so that's how I look at everything nowadays. Is this
Hmm.
helping or hurting me? That's why I was willing to
Yeah.
freaking do the ketamine therapy. After 3 years, I'm like, oh, everybody's talking about ketamine and it's so good for PTSD and all this stuff. Let me try it out. I went and
Hmm.
tried it out. I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. But I've seen from all the people that I sponsor and that I mentor at the mental health facility and at Sober Living that it does help people,
Right. Yeah.
especially alcoholics.
Right.
I've seen less of a benefit for recovering addicts, but for alcoholics, it works wonders. It's amazing that the things that these guys tell me when they're coming out and they're just like, "Oh my God, my life has changed and I'm gonna change everything,
Yeah.
turn my whole life around." I'm like, I love that for you, because ketamine's a disassociative, just like psilocybin is magic mushrooms, and that's how I found my relief from obsession, was through the disassociation of psychedelics, being able to disassociate from myself, right? I
Right.
freaking was able to talk and hold hands with my younger self. So it's like you're pulling yourself
Mhm.
away from your own self. And now you've got two of you, and one is the one that freaking is like the lost child that's trying to find answers, and the other one's got all the answers and is going to be brutally honest. It's that
Right.
it's that subconscious, that subconscious in your brain that just You know when you're doing something right and when you're doing something wrong.
Mhm.
That voice becomes really loud. And it's like, you want the answers? I've got the answers for you. Listen,
Yes.
this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you got to do to fix it. So I see it. And that is important to me. That is recovery. All
Love
recovery
that.
is figuring out what doesn't work for you until you
Mhm.
find out what does,
Yep.
right? So
Finding
cliche.
a
You only have
happy
to find it
life,
once.
right? All
Yeah,
right. Well, I thank you so much for coming on. This has been
my
so
pleasure.
fun today. Can you tell everybody where they can find you at if they want to follow you, all that stuff?
Yes. So I'm most active on Facebook. That's Quinn Lapere, just my first name. On that in my bio has the links to Cali Sober, my Cali Sober page, the support group, excuse me, the Men's Tribal House. I also sell Cali Sober merch, and we're holding Cali Sober meetings right now. They're going through beta testing to make sure that we work out all the fixes with a large support group. So we're doing it the same way that Alcoholics Anonymous built their program. The only difference is there won't be a board of members who's gonna freaking overpower me and say, "Hey, no mood or mind altering substances." I'm gonna have the voice that Bill Wilson had intended to have. So I'm super excited.
I love that. Well, as for me, you can find me at www.controlledchaoscoaching.com or at Controlled Chaos Coaching on any platform or Shana app. So thank you for tuning in and love y'all mucho.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.